Also, this may be just a light week. Also, the next one because July 4th and everything. All right. Well, so folks, welcome to the June 28th Wednesday occurrence of Ambient Work Group meeting. So first on the agenda, we have Keith for closing on the subsets and destination rule improvements.
Yeah, I realize that this topic probably best discussed with maybe a bigger audience, but I did want to highlight that we do have a pretty sizable section of the Ambient APIs doc that is Ambient APIs doc that hasn't been talked about in a little while. Trying to pull it up on my side. Yeah. So as far as how we're going to make changes to destination rule, there is a lot of discussion here about supporting subsets or not moving forward in Ambient, as well as what we want to do about subsets in the kind of Istio, regular Istio APIs. There was an issue created about this on GitHub, where you know, folks were and users were saying that they find subsets pretty useful, not having to create separate services for traffic splitting and such. That does get tricky with Ambient, so want to try to see where we are on this this destination rule improvements doc. It discusses several things about the future destination rule, and just kind of see if there's any progress that can be made on this. I don't see any comments on it.
Yeah, so. That was my comment as well. So actually, there's one comment down here. Has this been widely circulated? This is from 2022. This is from last year.
It's been around for a bit, but I saw it referenced in the Ambient APIs document and was surprised to see that it's been since 2022 that we've got comments. So.
It's maybe one of those things that we just got to pin cost and then bring this on top of the stack, right, to get people to go review this.
What's the right form for? I mean, API should probably be what, TOC. I feel like maybe this isn't the right meeting for destination rule improvements. Obviously, I mean, service it wherever you can. I mean, this is fine for that. But I don't know. What do you think, Francis?
Well, I look to. I'm laughing as I say this. I look to folks with more history in the community to in terms of how we make decisions. So I actually don't know how we make decisions on these. I thought we just review these docs and then in the contributors channel or in these meetings we go by a popular vote.
Well, API changes specifically are a broader topic, right? So it's like ambient Z-tunnel meeting probably is too small a forum. Like you probably need like more of the leadership involved. So I don't know if TOC. I feel like TOC has been traditionally where we would have API discussions. I don't recall. John says yes, so that must be true.
Yeah, I mean, it would be good to have if there's like a networking API or something. It's nice to have networking group kind of have rough consensus before we bring it up to the TOC. But yes, TOC needs to approve the API changes.
But I mean, if we want to spend some time here, given a lot of the networking folks are probably here anyway. I mean, I'm happy to chat a little bit about various opinions for subsets if that's useful, Keith.
Yeah, so just to clarify, I didn't necessarily write this. I didn't write this doc, and I've obviously got my opinions about subsetting. The only reason I brought it up in this form specifically is because it's listed in so in the Drive Ambient to Beta doc that Lynn wrote. There is a link out to the Ambient APIs doc where it talks about general API changes relevant to Ambient, and this destination rule doc is cited a couple of times there about in the suggestion in the document is it is recommended that we finalize a decision to support subsets in the destination rule improvements doc. So kind of by this chain of documents, I found this destination rule doc and just want to make sure as we try to get ambient to beta that we're aware that there's discussion at minimum that's needed here.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. Understood.
So I
but
think
yeah, so
we should probably
thanks
raise
for-
this.
Thanks for surfacing it. I think it's a good time to do that. I don't know, do you think it's useful to chat about it here while there are folks on the call?
I guess my question is, I at minimum, I think I want to understand this. We noticed that there are some comments from 2022.
Yep.
Do we have a reason why the doc hasn't been approved since then, or why maybe there's been movement and the comments have just been resolved? But does anybody have a current status on the doc?
Well, the current status on the doc is it's still in review, right? It's not approved or anything. So my guess is just that this probably got buried in the various other issues, which is why I brought it up into the still in review section, so that's on top of the stack.
Yeah, Costin's basically been a document factory for I don't know how many years now. So, yeah, I suspect this just got was one of the flurry of documents he had been authoring over the past year or so. But yeah, I do think it's worth just getting to a decision there. I don't know, John. Do you have any thoughts on that doc? Have you looked in a while?
I probably looked when it was first sent out, which is unknown date because that part wasn't filled in on the doc. But
Yeah.
I don't remember.
What is the? It'd be good to have like some action from here. Obviously, this probably isn't the right forum. What do you think is like the networking working group? Should we just bring it there? Or should we just bring it straight to TOC?
Do we still have a networking separate work group?
I don't
I
even
thought we
know.
combined everything. Yeah, I thought we combined all the Istio work groups.
Right, it would be the combined call, but
yeah. So maybe that's the right forum to go next before we go to the TOC.
But
It's
I think
actually,
either
this is not necessarily proposing an API change. Like if you look at the requirements, it's actually saying we should go over the docs and replace usage with not using destination rule, and then add tooling to migrate and add warnings. Like it is kind of an API change, but it's not actually changing an API and like these two API repo. It's more just recommending users not to use an API. At least my reread of it. If I'm maybe I just skimmed it, obviously. So
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, Keith. Maybe I misunderstood what you were saying earlier. So I guess your point, Keith, was that it basically suggests not using destination rule, which means we lose subsets. And is that okay? I think is what you're asking.
I haven't. My history with the doc is relatively new. Just came across this. I'm trying to figure out where we are with ambient beta work. But my reading of the doc is kind of similar to John's. At a high level, it's saying, hey, there are some fields in destination rule that don't make sense for ambient. We should consider getting rid of those entirely. I shouldn't say getting rid of. We should consider recommending users to not use those generally, or we should just not have those be used for ambient, or we should bite the bullet and use them in ambient anyway, which would be more work. That's my kind of understanding of the three options in the doc, and it goes through and discusses what those APIs are. I think that one way or another, we are going to have some weirdness with destination rule with ambient, just because there's so much in there. Subsetting, export to, and there's a lot of stuff that that makes sense in the ambient, other things that don't make sense in the ambient. We just need to have our plan for what we want to support in ambient, what we don't want to support in ambient, and start executing on that. I think is my call to action in general. Not immediately, obviously, but we should know what we're doing with destination rule in the long term, and ideally have issues for that, so folks can take up doing the work.
Yeah, I mean that sounds great. I think the question is, who's going to be the owner to drive that. I suspect Costin probably isn't going to have the bandwidth. So, and I'm not hearing volunteers either, but yeah,
well, I think
certainly we should have an answer here before we go beta.
I think he owns the dock. He owns driving this. That's my opinion.
I mean, yes, but I'm kind of talking more reality of, is it ever going to happen? If how do we prioritize this for Costin? That might be a little tricky.
I mean, I think that in a perfect world, yes, Costin owns the dock and is going to be driving this forward. I struggle to look at a dock like this or destination rule in general with respect to Ambient, and I don't see a reality where Ambient gets to beta without some of these questions being answered, without some of this work being done. And so for things like this, I think that it's important to call that out to everybody who's invested in getting Ambient to beta and just realize that this is that work, discussion, something, time has to be spent in this area. And if Costin is not in a position to drive it, somebody step up to do so. I could potentially, I don't claim to have the most expertise here in any shape, form, or fashion. But if what's needed is somebody to step up and make sure this gets done, I'm happy to do that. But my purpose of bringing it up in this meeting is to just make sure that we're aware that, and not even just that we're aware, but that we're accounting for this work that needs to happen so we can get Ambient to beta, which I assume is the goal of everybody on this call.
I think everybody here has a vested interest to see Ambient reaching beta.
I think Keith, we're all in agreement. I think it's just a matter of finding someone to drive this. So I don't know if you want to have just a side chat with Costin and see if he can pick it up, or maybe has some kind of like updates or anything like that. And we could just figure out who the right owner should be. I mean, if you're happy to take it, that's great.
So by the way, Costin is out of office on PTO until I think either later this week or middle of next week. What we can do is make this a item for next Wednesday's meeting and ask him to join. And also ping him on the internal channel about this doc. So I'll take over paying Costin. And then based on his feedback, we can say, what should we do with this item?
So I guess my question is, do we need I don't think we need an owner to read the doc and comment on it. I guess my question would be to John and Lynn. Well, Lynn's not here today, but because this doc was cited in the Ambient APIs document, do we see a future of Ambient beta without this doc? And if there is, then maybe we should focus on that instead of the destination rule improvements doc. That's probably confusing. Does that make sense?
Come again.
So again, the only way I found the destination rule improvements document that Costin wrote is in the Ambient APIs doc that John and Lynn wrote. So I guess my concern is if we can be making progress on this while also we can make progress on this without having a specific owner to quote unquote drive it, which I'm not sure, Nathan, if you mean drive by complete the work or just shepherd the work and make sure that it's being brought up and progress on it.
I specifically mean cat herding. Yeah.
Gotcha. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do cat herding, but I guess my question to John would be, you included or you or Lynn included this doc in the Ambient APIs doc. Do we see this as critical work, or let me be more specific? Do we see the destination rule improvements document being approved as necessary for Ambient to get to beta?
Getting approved of the work actually being done.
Most of the work is not related to Ambient, right? like what we recommend in the normal Istio docs about using destination role is impacting sidecars as well. I wouldn't want Ambient to get too hung up on that because that's controversial, right?
Okay.
And there's a section on destination role and Ambient in here that I'm trying to skim quickly, but that's probably what we should focus on.
Yeah, so I can link to that with the heading. Because again, my only focus for this is Ambient. I care about the bigger conversation, but in this meeting, I only really care about how destination will impacts Ambient. So if there is a subset, no pun intended, if there is a subset of the discussion that is focused on those things that impact Ambient, that's the conversation I want to have, rather than trying to do all the things.
Yeah, +1.
So that's a real question, right? The open issue is whether this improvement is a blocker for ambient beta. If it is, then we need to resolve this and get it done by beta. If not, then let's just go on parallel.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair representation.
Okay.
I think what's left to solve really is, I think it's already been established that destination role won't be in ztunnel, and what's left is what it looks like in the waypoint, which I forget the details. There's probably some discussion on the Ambient API docs, but I have to pull it up. So
I linked it in the chat for later, John, with that particular heading.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think the ambient relevant part skimming is around producer waypoint versus consumer waypoint, similar to the virtual service distinction that we've got. And we probably need to implement those semantics, as well as figure out how I guess present to destination rule in general would require a waypoint. So maybe there's likely some documentation exercises. Okay. Action items for this agenda topic. I will take on the action item of reading through the improvement stock and the ambient API stock and trying to pull out the ambient relevant pieces into a specific section. I think John's already done some of that. I'll go back and see if there is anything missing and just kind of flatten the hierarchy to get that doc out of the critical path. And then we can discuss the results of that next time. That sound good to everybody?
Sounds good. Thank you. All right. So next up, ambient task tracking. So this is topic from Phil.
Yeah, I think coincidentally, this is probably just an extension of some of the stuff that Keith touched on. But yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure there's like clarity in the work effort to like move ambient forward. And I think we're trying to get ambient beta for 119. Is that still a true statement, or am I?
If possible. Looking at the dates, though, for 119, I do not believe it's likely.
Okay, and that's fine. And I think that's kind of what we want to work on here. Is like, I know last time, Lynn, we were discussing the drive ambient mesh to the beta doc, and I believe all those items are captured on the ambient tracking board. Hopefully, I think. But I think whatever focus we need to do to kind of just have a concrete backlog of everything, that'll be helpful. And then, our team can help draft some things, etc. But, I just want to kind of wrangle kind of all this together in kind of like one view, if possible.
Mm-hmm.
And,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, so the board I linked is the only board I'm aware of that keeps track of all the, let's say that a one single place to see all the ambient issues, including the backlog and so on. Now, I think this board does not reflect the state of everything that we need to do to reach beta. And by everything that we need to do to reach beta, that's where the proposed beta scope document comes in. So I had meetings with both Lynn and Keith last week. And the one thing that we mutually agreed on is let's get the scope, let's drive to a clear beta scope first. And then based on that scope, we can then look at all the outstanding issues, whether they're linked to the board or not. And if they're not linked to the board, let's link to the board. If the issue does not exist, then let's create those issues and get into a backlog. And then we can figure out who are the contributors that can go work on this and just execute the as a project. Right now, without a clear scope, the answer to your question is no. We actually don't know. Well, one, we don't know what we need to build to get to beta because the scope isn't clear. And two, we don't know how long it's going to get there since we don't even have all the work items tracked.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I'm game to help accelerate that, but I think that is like super important.
Yeah, so I think last week's meeting we reached consensus that Lynn will help drive the beta scope doc, and Phil, you and I can work on the project management aspect.
Okay, that sounds good.
One quick call to action is I went ahead and created an OSS beta label, and as well as a view in the project for things with that label. So as those things get agreed upon for beta scope, you can go ahead and label it with the OSS beta label, so it can be tracked. I went ahead and added a couple, one to the board, one to just test to make sure it works, and two, because they were issues that they were bugs that felt like they blocked a beta quality product. So they can be removed, of course, but just wanted to let folks know that it exists.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we have the alpha flag. We don't have the beta flag until now.
So if we think we're probably most likely will land in 1.20, then we're realistically looking at like spring next year, right?
Let's see, 1.9.
Or is my math off?
It's like
I think your math
October?
is about right. I just need to let me see. Yeah,
Or
119 is
early calendar year 2024, right?
Well, 119 is August. 120, that will place 120 to November.
Okay.
Yes. And 121 will be early next year.
Okay.
Yeah, Quad. So I see your point. The thing is, but it's a chicken and egg problem, right? How many users are actually willing to deploy an alpha product in production? And I'm guessing not many.
Yeah, I understand it's a chicken and egg problem, but it would be premature to declare something better without actually having evidence that it's stable and suitable for production use.
I think that's one reason why I recognize there's a conflation of terms there, but I think that's the distinction between beta and stable, right? Like beta is a signal that this is reasonable for you to deploy in production. Stable is has been deployed in production and has been tuned and considered to be, well, for lack of a better term, stable. And I think that's the difference between those two stages.
Yeah, I mean, we can argue a lot about what it means, but usually beta means it's okay to deploy in production for most people. And I mean, we do need people trying it out because we cannot test every single production load. And we need people who will be willing to experiment and deploy it in Canary or wherever. So we get feedback.
Yeah, I completely agree. Feedbacks are important. I think one thing is that it's important, like one part of beta is stabilization of APIs. And so like there's one thing to say, to put the label beta, and there's another thing to check off all the list of the engineering efforts that we want to do before we're beta, such as like the API changes and compatibility changes, right? The latter is actually, I think, a lot more important because then users can actually start trying it out. Once, you know, when we feel comfortable slapping on the beta label and what that means and whether it means production ready or stable means that or whatnot, you know, we can debate that, but it's kind of, that's the label. The important part is that we do the work that needs to make the product actually stable, and then completely agree that the next step was then testing out that our assumptions that it's stable actually, you know, meet reality when people try it out. So. But I completely agree. We need you know, real feedback, but it's also, it's good to get the APIs stabilized before we push too many people on it. Otherwise, it's harder to break things. I mean, I think we'll still do it, but we'll feel bad about it.
So John, is it fair to summarize as we can test, we can test, we'll stabilize the API, we can test to the extent possible and release the beta, getting people to adopt this in production workload, and then we improve it from there? Or are you proposing that having the beta running production workload for a period of time is a prerequisite for declaring beta?
I don't think we have historically said that running in production is a prerequisite to get to beta. I do think we say that it's a prerequisite to get to. Yeah, well, I have to go check. Like we can find that out. We shouldn't.
I think that makes sense.
It's certainly useful. I feel a lot better calling it beta if, you know, people are running in production. But I think it may or may not be a requirement. Go ahead, Quat.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. We need to make sure that we have a distinction between beta API and beta runtime, because this is probably one of the instances where we have a new runtime, new proxy that has not seen all the possible, you know, traffic that other proxies have seen. It's much more important to have a stable or beta runtime, even with alpha APIs, and to be dangerous to have a beta API on a unstable runtime.
Yeah, I do think we will need to be very careful in our messaging. I've already seen some people that are like, oh, I am Ambient Alpha. Should I go deploy it to production? I'm like, well, at least you're asking. But the fact that you're asking means some people probably assume that they should and are considering it, which is kind of concerning, right? And that's for alpha. Like beta, I'm sure that we'll get people doing it. So
yeah, this is new because I mean, in the past we just relied on, you know, Envoy, which already had beta stable runtime, so we didn't have a case. I guess Mixer was the one, but Mixer is gone. So, but it was a similar situation. We have a new data plane component that is not stable, and it's too early to promote it to beta until you can expose it to the actual production load traffic.
I think specifically the distinction here is that we have a new runtime that is coupled to Istio. So Envoy, of course, other use cases, like Envoy as a runtime has other use cases, other products using it, and to Quat's point, giving it production production level traffic. But I don't see a path to doing that for zTunnel unless it's a lot more general purpose, which is not fundamentally not a requirement or goal of zTunnel, from my understanding. So I'm agreeing with what you're saying, Quad. I don't know. I don't see a way around it. Something has to come first.
Yes, I agree. It's a chicken and problem, but it's more fair to users not to call something beta when it's not hasn't seen production traffic, and just wait for more feedback rather than declare something beta without having very strong evidence that it's stable.
Well, I will say, sorry to cut you, Phil. I do know, I don't want to well, I do know that there are people that are going to deploy it before it goes to beta in production. So I think, you know, in the general case, like it's always a hard chicken and egg problem, but in this case, we may actually get some real feedback. So we should make sure that we tap into that and make sure that that actually happened, and we address any feedback if they have some. This is all based on, I don't know, hallway discussion. So I don't know if it's actually true. We should validate it, but go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, no, I mean, just to touch on that, John, I guess, you know, it's going to be, well, I feel like it's going to be a challenge to get a lot of people to kick the tires on this. So is there a way that we can like promote like a certain, like a profile of the use case that we think would, you know, if we put that through the paces, we'd be comfortable kind of graduating this up? Because we can get 1,000, like, you know, 2-node clusters ambient up, and I don't think that's going to be kind of what we're looking for, right?
Well, I think what they're looking for is a end user coming out and saying, I use this for like this scale for this long, right? For production traffic. Or maybe, you know, not production testing or canopy traffic, but it has to be a story that's not us. Because we can come up with synthetic loads, but they're not representative.
Right.
So to make sure I'm understanding the full point and make sure I'm not missing something, your main concern, I think, is Z tunnel when it comes to ambient. Is that correct?
Yeah, the runtime. So it's IP tables and Z-tunnel and eBPF, whatever is involved on the data path, because that has a much higher stake for issues.
Yeah, I agree. That's also the concerning part. I agree.
Okay, so what's the consensus?
I don't know that what were we trying to decide anything? Like, I think we all agree we want users to try it and we want feedback. Was there a specific question we were trying to answer?
My specific question is here is that, like, do we gate the beta based on actual production user feedback or not? Because I think that's the question that initiated all this debate. What I'm hearing is, well, beta for us means API stability, right? So that's number one. Whether we have production user feedback for the beta runtime is it's not a must-have. It's a great to have.
Yeah, I would say it's not just the APIs. Like, APIs are part of it. The runtime being beta quality, which is perhaps subjective, is a requirement. Whether that decision is made based on real users' production data or Louis' gut feeling or whatever we want is another question.
It has to be based on some kind of test.
Right. So it needs some criteria. What the criteria is, I don't know. I'm looking at the enhancements report. We probably have something.
It's on the features page of Istio.
Yeah.
The docs for the purpose for beta says used to vet in production, to vet a solution in production without committing to it in the long term, to assess its viability, performance, usability, etc. Targeted at all users. That's what we say for beta. That's the promise.
Yeah. So we've never said that in order to go to beta, you need to have pre-existing production usage. It would be nice to have. I don't know that we need to make it a hard requirement. I think the discussion is also going to be moot because I think we're going to get that feedback before we get the actual quality to beta level. So we may have an easy non-decision to have to make because we'll just have the data. I don't know that it's super productive, like 6 months before we go to beta, debating whether we need production usage or not.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, what's the risk if we don't feel like we got enough feedback?
Well, the risk is what happened to Mixer. We get GA product that is unstable, and we have a high cost to maintain and support it, and we spend a lot of time removing it, and it's a risk that's you pay for in the future, not now. If user prematurely deploy something that's not stable, you have an ongoing cost to support them.
Do I have to decide this now?
No, I don't think we do.
Okay, let's table this until we get closer to beta. All right, folks, anything else on this?
Just to chime in. So next steps on this is, are we focusing on kind of, I guess, creating like the exhaustive backlog of everything? Is that my understanding?
Yeah, so I see this in this order, right? Let's clarify the scope of beta, and that's Lin's doc. And then based on that, we break it down to the actual deliverables, generate the exhaustive list of backlog, and then we find people to do the work.
Sounds good to me.
All right, so last item, Keith, this is on you. Do you mean shipping priorities or slipping priorities?
Slipping priorities. So these are, so what I mean by that is we've got a couple things in the, I should have linked the doc, the drive ambient to beta doc that Lin is driving, and I just wanted to call out that there are a couple of things in the doc that currently don't have an item, don't have an owner and don't have a priority, and those items not having a priority or an owner is concerning. Let me link the doc just so folks can follow along. Yeah, so I've got a couple of them there. Sidecar interrupt is one of them. I think that would be useful to close on relatively soon. To be good to close on that one, just because it'll help us know what things we can table and what things we need to do before beta with sidecars, because I think that's probably a pretty underexplored aspect of the ambient initiative. And then the other one is trust and security hardening. There's currently a whole section of things in the drive ambient to beta doc that don't have an owner. Security is concerning just because this is a new deployment topology with a multi-tenant L4 proxy that's doing effectively, impersonation and ground certificates, and there doesn't seem to be investment towards hardening that for beta, so that's a concerning thing. And then the bullet point I think is the most concerning out of that security hardening section is edge cases around restarts and shutdown and things like that with the CNI. The upgrade story. I do know there is that Ben Leggett from Solo has been doing some work on the upgrade story, and there is a decision in one of the previous meeting notes. But there's no owner for that in the doc, meaning if the issues, it's not going to be an issue created for it, not going to be an owner on that issue. So this is just kind of like let the community know about this, to say, like, if this is something that you really care about, let's try to see if we can't put some resources on these things in a more quote unquote formal way, just so we don't duplicate work, but also we can ensure that the work does get done in a reasonable time for beta. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Just letting folks know that these things are slipping according to the doc.
So here's what I suggest. And this is let me see. Yeah, that's the beta scope doc. once we arrive at consensus on the scope, these may or may not, well, these may or may not be in scope for beta, right? And if they're not in scope, then the discussion is kind of moot. If we decide that these are in scope, then let's get them onto the agenda. And that's the most important part. Okay, so
Yes,
they are.
John's comment is kind of the reason I'm bringing this up, because they currently don't have an owner, therefore it looks like they're going to fall out of scope. But a little bit less for static kernel interop. We can always just say use ambient and fresh clusters for now. Like that's a possibility. But that second one with trust, security hardening, and edge cases, I don't see us getting a beta product without those. When it comes to something that we are asking you to just use in production, I just don't see it. So, like John said, those are some of the most important parts of ambient. And I know there's no names by them right now, but there really needs to be to get this thing to beta.
Okay, then let's mark them as P0s or P0s and P1s in the beta scope, and find owners for these. I think the state we're kind of in is it's a bit of a chicken and egg. Like we have not confirmed, we have not solidified on scope of beta, and so therefore people don't know whether these things will make beta or not. But it sounds like these things should be, and you know what I'm saying, that because we don't have a scope, and so we're not actively looking for contributors to work on these, and because we're not actively looking for contributors to own and run with these problems, they're slipping, and it may become a self-fulfilling prophecy whether they make beta or not. But both of these issues, that's like we need to resolve. Quad?
Yeah, so I think the risk there is that there are going to be some breaking changes coming. And regardless of what we're thinking about it, these changes have to be communicated to users. And we cannot just do everything at once and expect things to work well. So it'd be better to stage those changes. For example, this sidechain drop we know that it's going to break network policy for some people. And it might be better to release that earlier before everything else, so that users do not have to deal with like 20 breaking changes in one release. So we need to think about what sort of breaking changes we expect to have as part of ambient by default.
So if ambient beta is 120, then the only release between now and then is 119. So if we want to roll this out, it'll have to be 119.
Yeah, I understand. So, but we don't want to have like 120, just have like a list of 30 breaking changes at once, right? So the only way to deal with it is to at least understand what sort of changes we need to make and start releasing them earlier. So it's not 119, and like I just don't see that right now happening. I don't see any announcements or breaking changes coming.
So first of all, I agree with everything Quat just said. We need to give users a heads up. If I can be blunt, this is probably one of the most concerning things to me about the way we're currently going about the beta process. And by that, I mean, we are marking things as P0 and P1 based on resourcing, on having owners. It's been said a couple of times that we don't really want to mark things P0, P1 without an owner for them. But, where that leaves us is we're in a situation where, if I want as a contributor want to see this thing land in ambient beta, and I'm willing to work on it, then yeah, I'm going to go work on this thing that I want to get into beta, even though there may be other things that for ambient to even exist need to be done, but there's no resources allocated there. And so, in my opinion, it's going to be more helpful if we sit down and clarify what the minimum viable ambient beta looks like. Work backwards to do what Quat said and call out the breaking changes so we give users a heads up, and then figure out, what other things can be added once we have a good sense for what that minimum viable ambient is. Because the current state of the dock, there are several things, and again, just in my personal opinion, aren't required in that minimum viable ambient, but some things that aren't being resourced. And so I really think we need to pay some attention, give some attention to some of these things like trust security, Cyber interop, etc., and do first things first, for lack of a better term. Take care of things that have breaking changes, get them to the users in 119. If you don't have a ton of time, you don't have very much time at all, actually. I think feature freeze is in July. So like get first things first done, communicate those to users, and then, let's work on those things that, we would like to have for the ambient beta in 120.
Feature freezes in about a month for 119. If we want to get these out and roll out these gradually, roll out these breaking changes in 119, assuming that 120 is a beta release. So Keith, I do agree with you. The priority of these work items should not be based on resourcing, but rather based on what we, the maintainers of the community, think as the minimal viable product for beta here.
Yeah, that being said, I think that any that the work to pivot that, we'll need to talk to Lynn, obviously, because she's doing a lot of the driving of the beta scoping. But yeah, I think we don't anticipate there being a lot of turnout next week, but maybe async we can have some discussion on this and get a preliminary list, at least, of what the minimum viable product looks like.
Why don't we, I don't know if we have a forum in this meeting, but I suggest we decide on a group of stakeholders, not just Lynn. And then Lynn can help to drive the dock, right? But we should decide on a group of stakeholders who can decide what features makes into beta at what priority.
Is that group of stakeholders just TOC from a community perspective, or do we need a separate body? Just wanting to just curious.
I have thought about that question myself, but I feel like everything we kind of defer everything to the TOC. There's going to be something that
yeah.
Right, the TOC meets what, once a month? So if we wait for all the decisions for TOC, we can be waiting forever.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
What we can do is get a group of stakeholders together to do the homework first, to get to what we think is the right list, and just finally raise it to the TOC for final approval, rather than asking the TOC to work it out.
Fair enough. I'm good with that.
Okay. Rather be the scope. So I think John, you're definitely part of this. And we have Lynn. Keith, would you like to be a stakeholder here?
Yeah, I'm happy to.
And so when I say Keith, I'm assuming like Phil, you guys are on the same page. So I just include one of you, unless you want both your names to be on it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah, Keith is probably more important on this as far as putting priority on items.
Okay. Nathan, anyone from Aviatrix?
That's a good question. We can I can reach out to folks and see. I can get back to you. I think that's probably the best way.
Anyone else on this call think that they themselves or someone from their company should be on this list of stakeholders?
Francis, I'm happy to review it from Cisco's perspective, but it's not. I mean, we don't have a huge stake in this right now, anyway. But I'm happy to, I'm happy to sign off on it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Francis, just add me as the Aviatrix stakeholder.
All right, we have the floor. All right, well, so the expectation for the stakeholders is really review the doc and discuss amongst all of yourselves to arrive at the scope for Ambient and then raise a TOC for final approval. All right, which actually remind me, let's put a time box on this. When is the next TOC meeting? I wish I did not close my calendar. Let's see. Anyone from the top of their head remember when the next TOC meet?
July 10th.
Okay, that's very soon. Especially given July 4th is between. So how about we place it is always on the second Monday of the month. So if that's the case, can we just can we put on the line in the sand and say we'll present this, we'll share this with the TOC well in advance of August the 7th. Yeah. So what's the realistic time frame for this? 2-3 weeks? I'm looking at the four of you for what's a realistic time frame.
I'm interested, like John mentioned, either TOC can do it offline or we can have an ad hoc meeting. I think that probably makes the most sense. I think the expected turnaround time is greater than a week and a half and less than a month. So I'd probably be in favor of that ad hoc meeting.
So how about
discuss.
we split the difference? Just say we should have this decided by Friday, the 14th of July. That is, well, that's roughly about 10 working days from now. Or do we need another week?
$10 working days feels reasonable to me. I don't know about anyone else on the list.
Yeah, the only reason I'm hesitating is next week for the US is a holiday. Usually people take time off.
Ah, good point. Yeah, probably another week just to be safe.
Okay, so 21st, Friday the 21st. So, all set. All right, so we're 1 minute over. If there's nothing else, let's call this meeting adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye, folks.